Welcome back, everybody. You ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So, today we're going hyper-local. We're heading out to Temecula, California.
Ah, Temecula.
Yeah, it's known for its wineries, beautiful scenery.
Yeah.
But, their local politics.
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride recently.
It has been.
Yeah. And we're going to be looking at some excerpts from a piece called The Final Battle, Elections and Desperation.
Ooh.
So I think that kind of sets the stage for what we're about to get into.
It does.
And really, what we want to do with this deep dive is try to understand just what's been going on with this power struggle that's been taking place in Temecula. And, see if we can learn a little something about political strategy,
Yeah.
community engagement, and maybe even, that line between
Right.
advocacy and ambition, maybe.
Yeah.
And at the center of it all
Mm-hmm.
is this political action committee, One PAC. And let me tell you, in just a couple of years,
Yeah.
they have gone through some major transformations.
They have. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. So to kick things off, let's rewind back to 2024. One PAC is brand new on the scene,
Yeah.
and they spearheaded this effort to recall a school board member, Dr. Joseph Komrosky.
Now, school board elections, not usually the most attention-grabbing.
Right.
This one, a little different.
Yeah.
Komrosky, kind of a lightning rod, especially, more conservative views when it came to curriculum and social issues.
Yeah, definitely a controversial figure. And that's what made him, I think, a prime target for One PAC.
Right. Because they were presenting themselves as kind of, the champions of this more moderate,
Right.
community-focused approach.
Right. Like, we're here for everybody.
Right. Exactly.
So they go all in on this recall effort. They put a lot of energy into it.
A lot of energy.
And they actually succeeded.
They did.
They got him recalled.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It was really close.
Very close.
I mean, they only won by about 200 votes.
Wow.
And, in an election, that is a tiny margin.
Yeah. No kidding. I mean, that's got to be a wake-up call for One PAC, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, maybe we're not as invincible as we thought.
Exactly.
And you've got to figure that fueled a sense of, maybe a little desperation.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
To hold on to that influence.
Yeah.
Plus, Komrosky, I mean, he's out there.
Right.
There's always that chance he could try to make a comeback.
Right. So the threat's still there.
It's looming.
Yeah. So you've got One PAC. They score this big win. But they're kind of standing on shaky ground.
Right.
So what do they do next? They decide to double down.
Okay.
They get involved in the 2024 school board and city council elections.
So they're branching out.
Yeah, they're trying to broaden their reach.
Which, I mean, we see that a lot, right, with political organizations.
Mm-hmm.
You start with one goal, you have some success, and then it's like, okay, how do we build on this?
Yeah.
But expanding, that also means things get more complicated. And you might have to, make some compromises along the way.
Right. And that's where I think things start to get a little tricky for One PAC.
Okay.
Because they're still talk about unity and good governance.
Right.
But some of their actions are sending some mixed messages.
Interesting. So, like what? Give me an example.
Well, for instance, there was a statement made by Jeff PAC,
Okay.
who was one of the leaders of One PAC.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I quote, "A candidate that leads their messaging with LGBTQIA plus messaging is going to struggle to get the votes needed for election."
Ooh, that's a loaded statement.
Right.
Yeah, and I bet that raised some eyebrows.
Oh, yeah.
Especially from people who were initially supportive of One PAC.
Absolutely.
I think for a lot of folks, that was a sign that maybe, political strategy was taking priority over genuine advocacy.
Yeah, it seems like a real shift in focus.
It did. And this is where that idea of political expediency comes in. Making choices based on what you think will get you elected, even if it means
Right.
maybe putting some of your ideals aside.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous game to play.
It can be a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
Especially for groups that have, built their reputation on certain causes.
Absolutely. So I think to try and counter this perception that was building, One PAC makes some moves that seem like they're trying to show they are inclusive.
Okay, interesting. What kind of moves?
So in 2023, they celebrate Pride Month.
Okay.
They even launched an initiative called Temecula Has a Heart, which seemed to be focused on LGBTQ plus issues.
So on the surface, those could be seen as genuine efforts
Right.
to be more inclusive. But then you have that quote from Jeff PAC in the background.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder.
Right. What are the motivations here?
Yeah.
Is it really about inclusivity or is it damage control?
Right. Image management.
Exactly.
And then here's where it gets really interesting. 2024 rolls around.
Okay.
and One PAC. Completely silent on Pride Month.
Wow.
No celebrations, no mentions, nothing.
That's a pretty stark contrast to the year before.
It is.
I mean, that shift, that really says something, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a big shift.
It suggests that maybe, they were reevaluating their strategy.
Right.
Potentially moving away from stances that they thought might alienate voters.
Right.
And it's a reminder that even groups that start out with these strong ideals, they can be swayed by, the desire to win.
Yeah, that desire to win can be powerful.
It can be.
Yeah.
And that's when people start accusing a One PAC of being elitist.
Right.
They're seen as this group of political gatekeepers trying to control who gets elected and silencing anyone who disagrees with them.
Yeah, like they've got all the power and they're not afraid to use it.
Right. And that perception of elitism, it's often fueled by a lack of transparency and a real disconnect between, the leaders and the people they're supposed to be representing.
Right.
Creates that us versus them dynamic.
Exactly.
Which can be toxic for a community.
Yeah, it divides people.
It does.
Instead of bringing them together.
Absolutely. And that lack of transparency. Well, it gets even worse when some of One PAC's internal communications, they get leaked.
Oh, wow.
And in one of those communications, Jeff PAC, he makes this comment that raises even more eyebrows.
Oh, boy. What did he say?
He said, the best candidate isn't always the candidate who has the best chance to win.
Oh, it's so basically saying they're not necessarily backing the most qualified person, just whoever they think can win.
Yeah. And, a lot of people saw that as One PAC putting winning above, everything else.
Right, like their supposed values and the needs of the community.
It definitely rubbed people the wrong way.
Yeah, I can see why. It feels very cynical.
Right. And it makes you question their whole approach. Are they really about making Temecula better? Or just about, holding on to power.
Exactly. And, that conflict between principles and winning at all costs, it seems like it led One PAC to use some pretty aggressive tactics. Okay, like what?
Well, there were accusations that they were labeling candidates they didn't like as, quote, extremists.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a lot of these candidates, they actually had strong grassroots support. They weren't extremists at all.
Yeah, labeling and name-calling, it's a pretty common tactic in politics, trying to make your opponent seem scary or dangerous.
Right, make people afraid of them.
Exactly, and it can be really effective because it plays on people's emotions rather than, actual facts and policy positions.
And I bet it's especially effective at the local level, where people might not know a ton about the candidates.
Absolutely, yeah. It's much easier to influence voters with these broad labels than it is to get into the nitty-gritty of the issues.
So one of the candidates who was targeted with this extremist label was Melissa Anderson. She was a parent, very involved in the schools, had a lot of support from other parents and teachers.
Sounds like a pretty average person, not exactly an extremist.
Right. But One PAC tried to paint her as this radical who was out of touch with, Temecula families.
It's interesting how they tried to flip that narrative, like being an involved parent is somehow a bad thing.
Right. It's like they wanted to create this fear that she was going to, disrupt the status quo or something.
And this is where, critical thinking is so important. You have to be able to see through that kind of rhetoric, look for evidence.
Right. Don't just take their word for it.
Exactly. You have to do your own research, think for yourself.
Absolutely. And they also went after Emil Barham. He was a local businessman, had a reputation for being fair and level-headed.
Sounds like a reasonable guy.
Yeah. But One PAC tried to make it seem like he was, too extreme for Temecula.
It's like they were trying to create this idea of acceptable views, and anyone outside of that box was an extremist.
Yeah, and it wasn't just candidates they targeted. They also went after community members who dared to speak out against them.
Ooh, so they were really trying to control the narrative, shut down any dissent.
Yeah, pretty much. And, that kind of behavior, it can really hurt a community.
Absolutely. It erodes trust, makes people afraid to speak their minds.
Right, and it creates this climate of fear where everyone's walking on eggshells.
Exactly. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of One PAC.
So all of this is building up to the 2024 elections, right? There were 4 school board seats up for grabs, and One PAC had endorsed candidates in all of those races.
So this was like their big test.
Yeah, to see how much influence they really had.
Would the voters go along with their endorsements, or would there be some pushback against their tactics?
Well, the results, pretty surprising, actually.
Really? How so?
Out of the 4 school board races, only one PAC endorsed candidate won.
Wow, only one.
Yeah, this is a pretty big blow, right?
It is. It suggests that maybe their strategy backfired.
Yeah, maybe all that negativity and fear-mongering turned people off.
It's possible voters might have been looking at the candidates' qualifications more closely, thinking about who would truly represent them, not just blindly following endorsements.
Right, like they were starting to see through one PAC spin.
Exactly. And, there's one more twist to this story.
Oh, there is.
Remember Dr. Komrosky?
The school board member who was recalled.
Yeah, he decided to run again in 2024, hoping to win back his seat.
Oh, wow. So a direct challenge to One PAC.
It was, and the results of that race, incredibly close.
No way.
As of right now, Komrosky is actually in the lead, but just by a tiny margin.
Oh, wow. So it's still up in the air.
It is. They're still counting votes. But no matter who wins, it's clear that this whole election has really divided Temecula.
Yeah, it's like this whole saga has exposed these deep fault lines within the community.
Right, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah, what does this mean for Temecula going forward?
That's the big question. It's too early to say for sure. But one thing is clear. This whole situation, it's a perfect example of how local politics can be just as intense and dramatic as national politics.
Yeah, sometimes even more so.
It's a reminder that even in a small town, these issues of power and representation, they matter, and they can be really contentious.
Absolutely. And, this whole thing in Temecula, it makes you think about the bigger picture, doesn't it?
It does. This is playing out all over the country. This struggle between different visions for what a community should be.
And the tactics that are being used, the manipulation, the misinformation, it's concerning.
It is. And I think it's on all of us to be more aware, more engaged, more willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah. We can't just sit back and let this happen.
We have to be active participants in our communities.
Exactly. And I think this deep dive into Temecula is a perfect illustration of that. It's a wake-up call for all of us.
Yeah. And it really makes you think about, how did this all happen in a place like Temecula?
Right.
It's not like a huge city, you know? You would think it'd be a lot harder for a group like this to operate in the shadows.
You'd think so. Yeah. But I think that's one of the things that makes this case so fascinating.
Yeah.
It shows that this stuff can happen anywhere.
Even in these places that are supposed to be, all about community and transparency and,
right?
togetherness.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, what's the solution here?
Yeah.
How do we prevent this kind of thing from happening again?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, there's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think it starts with awareness, We need to be aware of the tactics that groups like One PAC are using.
Right.
So that we can recognize them when we see them happening.
Yeah, so it's not just about being informed about the issues, but also about, being informed about who the players are, what their strategies are,
right,
their motivations.
Absolutely. And being willing to ask those tough questions.
Yeah. Don't just take what you're told at face value.
Exactly.
Really dig deep.
Look for the evidence, and challenge those in power.
Yeah.
When they're not being straight with you.
It sounds like it all comes back to, critical thinking.
It does.
And media literacy. We can't just be, passively consuming information anymore.
Right.
We really need to be actively engaging with it.
Thinking about it, analyzing it.
Right.
Yeah. Coming to our own conclusions.
Yeah. That's a lot of responsibility, though, to put on everyday people.
It is. But it's also an opportunity, you know. When we engage in critical thinking, we empower ourselves.
Yeah.
To make better decisions,
right,
to hold our leaders accountable, and to, create a more just and equitable society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Temecula's political roller coaster.
Buckle up.
Yeah, right?
It's been a wild ride.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that, we can't take anything for granted.
Right.
We can't assume that our local communities are, immune to this kind of stuff that we see happening on the national level.
No, they're not.
We really need to be vigilant and informed and engaged if we want to make sure that, our communities are truly representative of the people who live in them.
Absolutely well said. And I think it's important to remember, too, that this story's not over yet.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We still don't know the final outcome of that school board election.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects of this whole thing. They're going to be felt in Temecula for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on Temecula and see what happens next.
Yeah, we will.
But for now, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been fascinating.
Yeah.
And a little bit scary, but
right.
I think ultimately hopefully we've all learned a little something
I hope so.
about, how important local politics really is.
Absolutely.
So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
See you later.